Hi guys, welcome back on the channel. On today's video, we're gonna compare late and early 100 Years War armor, weapons, styles. We're gonna see the differences between the horses, their barding, and the equipment the soldiers, the knights, the common folk used at those two different periods. The miniatures I'm using are Perry for the late part of the 100 Years War, and for the early part, these are all from Claymore Castings. So without any delay, let's go and see our first slide between late and early 100 Years War knights. You see obviously the difference in armor. You see the pauldrons, you see breastplates, you see the vambraces, everything full armored cuirasses for all the late 100 Years War knights. And here you see a lot of chainmail, different kinds of helms. Also, the way the horses are barded in the late part of the 100 Years War, obviously they had plates, obviously, but this cloth barding was probably less popular as it was in the early part of the 100 Years War. Again, very beautiful knights both. Here again, you see from early on your left-hand side, a lot of chainmail, coat of arms with cloth, and on the right-hand side, you see a fully armored knight. And you see also the barding, because I know both miniatures are historically accurate. They're following, the sculptures are following the historical counterparts of the miniatures they're creating. It looks really good, but you see, the difference in development. I would say that the late 100 Years War would be after the 1400s. The early would be, Gracie Poitiers until 1360, 1370, and then you would have something in between. Again, you see the knights here on the left, with the early 100 Years War. Don't misunderstand. You can see here the vambraces and the rear braces and the pauldrons on their hands, different helms, obviously, but you can see here fully armored knights, really heavily armored knights with almost minimal chainmail. Now, the shields. On the late 100 Years War, for the mounted knights, obviously they used the shields because they were trying to protect themselves from arrows. But as we go further, you will see that shields are not used because of the armor. Again, here another comparison between the late and the early. You see the knights are lighter armored. They have a lot of chainmail. It was a lot of chainmail at that time. It was a transition for the plate, and they had partial plate, but the late part, the late 100 Years War knights on the right are fully armored. If you ask me, I like also a lot the late 100 Years War knights. They're very beautiful, very formidable. They are wearing shields, obviously. Just to mention that the miniatures on the left are First Corps. They're not Claymore. These knights are First Corps knights. Another example, these are Claymore, very and late, beautiful both. Very different. You see on the left, the orange knight has just chainmail and the padded jacket, and obviously he has armor on his legs. But the late part are very, very, very formidable unit. So very different, but both, I would say, very, very beautiful. Now let's see a little bit about the Militia. What's the difference in Militia? If you check on the left with the late, it's Perry, and on the right they have the Claymore. It's very similar. Militia and lower ranking troops didn't change that much in these 100 years. They were working these heavy padded coats. They had their shields. Maybe the weapons would have been improved, or the helms, or in the latter part of the 100 Years War, as you can see here, they would have worn some bits and pieces of plate armor they would find. But it didn't really change, and you will see this in the longbowmen as well. Again, if you see here on the right, extreme right, this is a Perry miniature for a militia type of infantry guy, and you see here on the right, on the left, a Perry early 100 Years War heavy, common heavy militia soldier. There's not much difference except obviously the design of the sculpt, but you see the equipment are almost similar. If you go here now, we see some men-at-arms. Again, you will see that there is a lot of progress in armor. You see that the man at arms of that time, he had his sword, his shield, always wearing shields, because obviously their armor was not that powerful as it was in the later part. But you can see he has his rare braces, he has his gauntlets, he has his greaves, his sabatons. The differences was basically in the breastplate. He has his van braces. He has everything. But you see there on the right, the late part of the Hundred Years' War. The armored knight was fully armored knight. The difference was huge. But you can see now the weapons, because they had double-handed weapons in the late part of the Hundred Years' War, and their armor was quite, formidable. They were not using shields as much in the latter part of the Hundred Years' War. I think shields were almost obsolete. Here again, the same. We have on the right men at arms and lesser knights, with again similar. Again, we see the greaves, we see the rare brace, the gauntlets. We don't see pauldrons. Obviously, the helm. It's an older style, but here, although this could be an in-between period, because you can see the late part. They have a chainmail. Not plate for their necks, but you can see he's totally fully armored in comparison with what the early part of the Hundred Years' War knight has. And obviously you see the shields that they were used, and here no shields, because most of them had the double-handed weapons, and they were quite confident that they would be okay. Again, similar, you see here how the armies look, the feel of the armies. You can see how they look. There is a lot of more material to paint in the early part than the later part. Both beautiful, both really nice. I like them both, but I have a soft spot for the early part, I would say. All this mixture of chainmail, plate here and there, some padded cloths, and it makes the army on the left, the early part, look quite interesting. Without taking anything from the later part, they look beautiful. But I think the early part, I have a soft spot for the early part, I would say. Now again, another compilation of a mass deployment. Again, you see the heavily armored knights on the right of the later part of the Hundred Years' War. A little bit of chainmail under the neck, but in general fully armored. With gauntlets, greaves, sabatons, van braces, breastplates, no shields, and of course the less armored knights, or you can see they have the greaves here. And they have the paulins is what we're talking about, the knee, but a lot of shield, a lot of chainmail, padded clothes, obviously much less armored. Here again, another comparison of how heavy infantry, a local, militia or heavy infantry would look. A lot of padded cloths, and here could be, these are knights obviously, but heavy, high-ranking men at arms would look very different. I like both. I enjoy both. I said again, I have a soft spot for the early part. But let's see the longbows here. Not a big change in the longbows. I mean, less padding, probably a little bit more during the latter part of the Hundred Years' War, that it's on the left. But again, maybe a little bit more plates here and there. They could have the longbowman from looting from the dead of the battlefield. But very similar, and very, the common folk, the common soldiers, the development was very minimal. Obviously, weapons would have been better in the latter part, but again, nothing huge. You see here, left, you have Claymore Castings, early Hundred Years' War longbowman, and the later Hundred Years' War longbowman for Perry on the right. Not a huge difference. A little more padding, obviously. Some of the longbowmen on the early part have just clothes. But again, the common folk didn't change that much. Again, here another example of longbowman. We have late on the right, on the left, and early on the right. Again, obviously the early would have some different types of helmets, but not huge difference. What I'm saying is, and showing previously, that the Hundred Years' War armies were not armies where everybody had the same uniform, and that's why when I ask this question is that many knights would have had old armor. Many knights in the 1400s would not have had. I could not afford the state-of-art armor that I showed you previously. So it's not a bad thing to mix if you want. Okay, maybe you want to keep one type of mini, You want to stay with Claymore, you want to stay with Perry, but Claymore can move up to the later part, especially for, if not for the knights that will have up-to-date armor, maybe for the heavy infantry and longbowman, they can very easily be mixed. Here again, the crossbowman. Here on the left, you see late part of the Hundred Years' War crossbowman, French militia, very similar to the crossbowman of the early part. Again, French, different helms a bit. You see bits and pieces of plates that they may have found in the battlefield, like this guy here who has the polonaise and the greaves and the sabaton stolen from somewhere. And on the right, again, he may find something, but not that different that you cannot use together. So this is just a photograph of how an army would look fully deployed in the early Hundred Years' War. So a lot of variety, a lot of shields, a lot of different types of combination of armor. It's something that I really like in the early part of the Hundred Years' War. And the later part, again, not bad. I've mixed some militia. Not bad, I mean, not bad, beautiful. Again, but they would look more robust. They would have more armor, and they would look more formidable. But if we go back, it's not. You see this guy here, for example, in the center, who is, and the guy on all the heavy infantry or militia infantry of the Claymore. Very easily, you can see they can be used. Obviously, there's a difference in design intent, but very easily they can be used and mix with the heavy infantry of the later part of the Hundred Years' War. So anyway, guys, this is from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you liked the comparison. Thank you so much for watching, and bye-bye. Have a nice weekend, and hopefully I'll post more videos soon.